Years ago, H.G. Wells visualized roads such as these in his science fiction fantasies. And today they're a reality.
You're listening to The Afternoon Commute with John Adams and Chris Kendall.
Welcome to The Afternoon Commute. Today is October 6, 2015. If you'd like to hear previous episodes of The Afternoon Commute, you can go to hoaxbusterscall.com, and you'll see those posted up there alongside the most recent episode of Chris's Monday night broadcast, the original Hoax Busters Call. Also posted up there are various videos and articles, some of those original in nature, so make sure you check those out as well. For any and all things Hoax Busters, go to hoaxbusterscall.com, and Chris, just want to say that was, from what I've heard so far, that was a good episode you did on the organ shooting that didn't happen.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and the you've got corresponding videos posted up there at Hoax Busters Call right now, talking about all of the usual anomalies.
Yep.
And, yep. Our guest today is he's a confessed listener of the Afternoon Commute, and we appreciate his listenership. We also appreciate him coming on and speaking to us. And I would hope that in the future we could do it more frequently because I really like what he has to say. And his name is Jose Barrera. And you can find all things Jose Barrera at josemariabarrera.com. And he's a poet, he's a researcher, he is an all-around Renaissance man. And he's coming to us today from the stormy East. Jose, how are you doing today, sir?
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me again here, guys. It's a pleasure.
Well, thank you for coming on with us. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you listening to our podcast.
Oh, it's a big pleasure. You always have interesting guests and things to say, so thank you for having me. It's an honor on my side. Thanks.
Absolutely. We are going to discuss the cult of reason today, and there is a modern version of the cult of reason, and if people aren't familiar with what the cult of reason was during the French Revolution, it was a cult. It was a real cult. It was a religious cult. They believed in the goddess reason. And I'm going off of memory here, like I was telling Chris and Jose beforehand. I apologize that life gets in the way and I wasn't able to brush up on my French Revolution history. But from what I remember, Girard was one of the leaders of that cult, and I think they overtook cathedrals, like Catholic cathedrals, and renamed them the Temple of Man. They did not worship idols. What they would do is they would actually have real females dress up as goddesses, because they did not want to worship inanimate objects. It was the worship of man, because man in of himself was basically the way that abstract ideas like reason and liberty and science and knowledge and nature all come through man. So therefore man would have to be worshipped. And this splinters off in the modern day into a lot of other things. You have really the ideas of sociology and the social sciences come out of that as well, like with Auguste Comte and in the later time periods. And also you have what you have coming out of that is it was basically Freemasonic in nature. I mean, everybody who's done a little bit of research on the French Revolution knows that it was Freemasonic, and anytime you read any Freemasonic literature, you will find references to reason. Thomas Paine was a famous revolutionary at the time. Chris and I have done exposés on Thomas Paine before, and he even wrote a book, which is on my bookshelf. It's called The Age of Reason. libertarians, of course, the libertarian idea is all based around reason. The magazine for the Libertarian Party is called Reason Magazine. But then also you have the scientismists call themselves, have conferences like the Reason Conference. So everybody's just so reasonable. But Jose, why don't you talk a little bit today about the cult of reason and how it plays itself out in today's world?
Okay, perfect. So what I want to present today is a thesis, and I think it's pretty obvious, and is that after basically before the French Revolution, I always ask myself what happened, but because if you can see in a span of a century or even less, Europe and the Western world went from a bunch of monarchies, and that was the preferred system of governance around the world, into all these states that we have today, all these democratic states. And that started, right? The first one was with the French Revolution, but you can see that there was a shift of power from all these monarchies and all these religious states where you had the Catholic Church behind into these secular democracies. So there was a turn of power in the world, but it's never looked as such, right? Like every time you see one of these monarchies that came down, like in the French Revolution, and then all the different monarchies in Europe, which if they were not decapitated, they were relegated to a second, to basically just decorative figures. They're looking in isolation, but not as a movement. And what happened in the world? How come we ended up with all these nation states in the 20th century, right, starting in the 19th century? And what was the process that brought us to that point? So what I want to present and what I want to show you is I want to basically demonstrate how the balance of power tilted from what used to be monarchies and the church into the merchants. And then the merchants took over the world, and we live in the world of the merchants today. So let me show you a little bit this process, how it happened, and let's look at the background historically, and then we can appreciate what happened and how things came about. So imagine that we go backwards in time, say 1,000 years, and imagine how the world is at that point. So what you have is a small elite who are basically the bishops and the priests and the kings and the lords. And the world is divided into city-states where you have a feudal lord or kings. And what they do is they maintain areas, right? And they have the power of the army. And they're surrounded and supported by the priests and the church. And then the rest of the people are the peons who are in the peasants who are working in the fields. And if you think about it, for millennia, the world looked pretty much the same. Like if you look at the world 1,000 years ago and say 500 years ago, what you have is pretty much the same, right? You have peons working very, very harsh works on the fields, and there is no technological advancement, or is very little technological advancement. And if you see the real technological advancement has been in the last 200 years, where we had an explosion of ideas and technology that has transformed the world. And I think this comes with the cult of reason, and I'll try to elaborate and show you how this happened. And I think once you get the big picture, I think it's pretty obvious. So any story has a beginning, and let's start at some point where the transformation goes from the ruling of the church and the kings into the ruling of the merchants. And basically what you had was the power of the church and faith, and how it was supplanted by a new secular system where the power is reason behind. and is run by the merchants. So you can imagine that you have the trinity of power, and it has three sides, right? So you have on one side what would be, and basically if you think about occult premises, there is something that is as above, so below, or as within, so without. What you have, right, is that you always have the body. Humans are composed of three parts, which is body, mind, and spirit. And you can imagine that any composition, any organization, like, for example, society, can be seen in the same way. So you have three forces that control society, which are basically the army, that was basically the warlord who was the king. And then you have the faith, which is the church. And then you have the mind, which is the merchants. So you have these three powers in balance at all times. And for many, many years, that was the case. And at some point, what happened is that there was a coup where the merchants took over power. Are you still there, guys?
I'm listening.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So, in this trinity, you can imagine that the body is the action, which is the army, right? Is force. And then reason is the merchants, and is what would correspond to the mind. And then the spirit, or the feelings, or faith, is the church. And you have these three powers balancing basically society. So let's start and see what happened, right? And how is that the hegemony of the church for 2,000 years they control the world, and in this case, say 1,600 years. How they lost control or part of the power, and then at the end there was a coup, and they were basically taking out of France in the French Revolution, and then later on they came on, but just like a secondary figure, right, and more like a symbolic thing than anything else, and their power and the power of the kings was supplanted by these democracies and these democratic states that we live on now. So if you see what happened, right, if we go back in time and we go back to 1454, that's when Gutenberg came out with the printing press, and they started to print the Bibles. So you can imagine that at that point, right, what you have is a technological revolution where the word of God is not, there is no a single power broker, namely the church, who can say what God said and so on in the Bible, but all of a sudden there is this mass distribution of knowledge through the printing press. So all of a sudden the dissemination of knowledge becomes something that is a ritual by more people than before. Before, books were a luxury item, and they were manuscripts, so they had to be copied every time. And Bibles, you have all these beautiful printed Bibles, but it took like years for monks to copy every time a book, right? Or in this case, the Bible. So it was something that was very costly and took a lot of effort to bring to people. Another interesting thing that happened in the 15th century, right, is the discovery of America. And think about this. Up to that point, what happened is that we had this idea that Europe was the center of the universe, right? And all of a sudden, when you discover America, all of a sudden, there is this idea the world is way bigger than it was before. And a few years later, right, like 50 years later, you have Nicholas Copernicus, who comes and says, you know what, the sun is the center of the universe and it's not the earth anymore. So what you start seeing is that you start having this shifting between having a world where the people, the humans, right, and the geocentric world, where we are the center of the universe, and then we start to be relegated to a second place, right? And think about what happened, like, to extreme today. The idea that we have today, the conception of the cosmological conception that we have, is that we're just a simple, a very small accident, and we're lost in a leg of billions of years size galaxy, lost in space, and we're just a speck of dust, lost and wandering around a senseless world. And that's pretty much the scientific conception that we have today of where we are. So in 500 years, we went from being the children of God and the center of the universe to be just lost in space and being a speck of dust. So you can see that the mentality of what happened to us changed dramatically. And then later on, you start seeing with the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, what you start seeing is that things start to be encoded into laws. So you have, for example, Newton, who starts codifying the movement of the planets, and he comes with a gravitational law, and you start seeing that there are alternative explanations to the kingdom of the church and the word of God, right, in the Holy Book. And then all of a sudden, you see that the democratization of knowledge, right, and people start thinking. And so in a way, this starts to erode the hegemony of the church as the center of knowledge. And then towards the end of this, right, of this intellectual process, because I think this is the point that I want to try to make, is that at some point what happens is that the tool to know the universe and the world stops being faith and the Christendom, and it moves into reason. Now, think about this, that is very interesting, and is that the tool of the merchants is reason. And reason, if you think about it, what it means is reckoning, is ratio, is counting, and accounting is the tool of the merchants. Mm-hmm. So in a world where the merchants rule the world, the tool of the trade, right, and the tool to see the world is going to be reason. So my contention is, and what I want to show to you guys and the public in general, is that at some point when the church lost its power and these monarchies lost their power, and we got into this secular world ruled by bankers and merchants, then the tool of the day, right, and the ideology shifted from being a faith-based system into a reason-based system. And then it's fairly obvious how in the French Revolution, what happened is that the merchants took over, and then what happens is that they brought the goddess reason, because that was the tool of the trade. So I think I've been talking for too long, guys. So I don't know if you want to have any comments or something, and then I'll continue.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Now, I've been looking into history for quite some time, and I was thinking that a lot of this is worked out ahead of time, just like we can pretty much concur, at least to a certain extent, that wars are worked out ahead of time, the outcomes of the wars, and I think that when we do these revolutions, that the aristocracy is fully aware of what's going to happen. I don't really see how they wouldn't know that. And it's not really a real usurpation of power. What it is it's a transfer of power. And I think that we go through different periods of time. If you go down the historical timelines, you can see this over and over again, where there's these time periods where the royalty rules, and then another time period where a revolutionary group comes in, and then royalty comes back in vogue, and then once again revolution comes back in, and it's this over and over shifting kind of ping pong, shifting between. And I like the analogy that you were using about how, about the Trinity, but the Trinity looks to me like a method of I guess, suppression of people, and they know that for only a certain amount of time period, this particular model is going to work. So then we got to move it back into the other one, or so on and so forth. And I mean, usually, like take for instance with the Jacobins, or a lot of the even in the 1800s with like the revolutionary groups in that second wave of revolution. You had like the Carbonari and the Freemasons active in that time period too. And so there's a lot of different revolutionary movements that go on throughout periods of time in different countries, and they take different shapes and forms. And people will either attribute those to being good or bad, like you commonly hear in patriot media, the French Revolution was an Illuminati revolution, but our revolution was a good one, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you can, and so I just see. But when you look into all of the revolutions, you always come back to the same thing. It's revolutionary groups that are mostly Freemasonic in nature, or maybe Jesuitical in nature, and they are in alignment with the royalty. The example I gave on a call not too long back was that even before World War II started against Japan, Emperor Hirohito was knighted by the Queen of England. So there's all that type of stuff. Anybody have any comments on that?
Yeah, but remember that Louis XVI was decapitated, right, in the French Revolution. So I think there are some coups where there are shifts, so just like the mafias, where they have different factions and families, and sometimes some take over the others. And I agree with you. I think that in a world of ignorance, you can fool people and tell them that there is this father in the sky, and that he has a representative in earth that is the Pope, right? And there are still people who believe that these days. But 200-300 years ago, it was easier for people to swallow that story, and that the kings were the descendants of the gods and so on. But as you start having this democratization of knowledge, right, and people start to read, and you start to have books printed and so on, you start have masses of people, especially merchants. If you think about after the discovery of America, what you had is all these people trading in the oceans around the world, and they start to amass these huge fortunes. And so I think there were new families of mobsters that show up with new power, and then there these tectonic plates start to shift, and then the myth that you had runs old, and people stop believing it, right? So they have to come up with a new myth and a new thing that people can believe in. And I would say today is the nation state, which pretty much supplanted the role of God and the church that we had before. But you see the same traits are still today running in the nation state, right? So you have the high priest, who is Obama, say, and then God is the state, and it's all powerful, and it can see what you do, and it protects you, and gives you housing and health and everything else, right? So the traits are exactly the same as the old God, but now is called the state. But it's been supplanted in a very clever way, where people think that they control. They're the rulers, right, and not the serfs. So I think that was the big shift that happened in that system. And today you can see what happened in all these monarchies. What happened is that they were in debt up to their ears to the merchants and the bankers, who ultimately ended up controlling the different monarchies. And during the 19th century and later in the 20th, they created all these central banks that run basically pretty much the currency of the state. So I think there was a shifting in power by all these drug dealers and all these merchants who used to trade in opium and sugar and tobacco and all the products from Americas and Asia. which were narcotics, by the way. That's the main thing that they did. And then all the financing families and all the bankers who finance all these trades, and they ended up amassing more money than the church and the kings. And then that's what precipitated the shift in power. Any comments?
Well, I mean, you see it in our modern society, all of our social constructs that people engage in, like you know the holidays. So we're coming up on that, or coming up on the holiday season. Everything that is, maybe not everything, but it pretty much it predominates in our culture to have. Whether it's a wedding ceremony or it's the Halloween celebrations or Christmas celebrations, it's all driven by the merchant class. It's all driven by commercialization and all that. And our social relationships and stuff in that regards is heavily centered around buying and spending a lot of money. Like people spend an exorbitant amount of money on wedding ceremonies and all that stuff, and it's all driven by the merchant class, the commercialization and all that.
Absolutely. I didn't think about that before, but it's so obvious, right? And these used to be religious ceremonies and Hollywood-wide ceremonies, right?
Right. And now I see this. Well, I don't know how much more pronounced it can get, but it is heavily centered around just a large outlay of cash. Like a child's birthday, for instance, it has to be tied to some spending spree, like an exorbitant. Like you have to go out and spend a bunch of money. Like some people spend thousands of dollars on just a child's birthday.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is by design. If you think about it, one thing that happened during the French Revolution, and is super interesting, is how they try to erase the past in the very basic things. And I think two things are beautiful examples on how they started to move and transition people from the old myth to the new myth. And the first one is that they decided that during the French Revolution to change the calendar. So they decided to rename every month, and they decided to start a new counting of history from the year of the revolution. So they just threw away the start of time with the birth of Christ in the year 0, and they decided to...
Didn't they have 10-day weeks?
So that's the other part. The other thing that they brought is the metric system. So the decimal system was introduced by design and forced by legislation upon the population. So they decided to take everything that was, and think about this, is super interesting. We were talking about the geocentric world where people is the center of the human, right? You are the center of the universe, and Earth is the center of the universe. And then the measures used to be that, right? So everything was a reference to our own bodies. So if you think about the feet and the inch and all the measurements were in comparison to the human body, and all of a sudden when you bring this cold metric system, all of a sudden the unit of measurement is 1/10 of a millionth of the distance between Paris, and so it becomes something that is completely abstract, where what you're doing is you're taking away the humans from the center of the universe, and you're just relegating them, and you're bringing this system of abstractions, which is not related in any way to us. So that's super interesting. And part of that, right, is what they did was they brought these 12 months. They were not able to bring 10 months because of the moon happens to go around almost 12 times. The revolution of the moon around the phases of the moon is like 12 times, so they were not able to enforce the 10 month if they wanted to. But what they did is they created months of 3 weeks of 30 days, right? So they had 3 weeks of 10 days, and then the other thing that they removed was the Sunday, which was the holy day, and then they had only 3 days, which were the revolutionary days, right? And so basically what they brought was a complete different way to sense time. And the last thing that was madness that they tried to create was the day had 20 hours. So they created a new timing system where they had 20 hours, and each hour had 100 minutes. So they brought this, and you can see faces of clocks of that time of the revolutionary, of the French Revolution, where you have in the clock has only 10 hours. And people went crazy with this, and when Napoleon came to power, he brought that down and brought the 12-hour time system back, because people were not able to couple with 100-minute hours and things like that. But it's crazy how, to what extent they went to modify the way people measure and account for things.
Yeah, it's also interesting, too, is that was really a laboratory for communism, in it of how we could, for lack of a better word, like scientifically and psychologically shift a society out of something into something completely and totally arcane and different. And I mean, even a lot of the stuff that they base it off of the writings of Rousseau, I mean, those are very Marxist in and of themselves. Like Marx and Engels were all into Rousseau. That's I mean, a lot of these countries out there are laboratories. Chris and I have talked about that before, and they kind of see what control mechanisms work and test them out on the public, and what doesn't work gets discarded, and what does comes in later. And like I was saying, is the cult of reason is directly linked to the social sciences, which everybody has social sciences now, and sociology. It also dips its toe into behavioral psychology, like before Pavlov and Skinner and all the rest of those guys. So yeah, I definitely agree with that, and it's interesting, relating reason to the merchant class, because if you think about the word rational, right, and it's got ration, right? And that's what a merchant does, is he rations.
Of course, because it comes from ratio, right? Which is a comparison. Right. So basically, what you're doing, and this is what is amazing about this, is that what you're doing is when you talk about reason and you talk about ratio, what you're talking is about quantity. So what you're doing is you're quantifying everything. Because in order to reason about things, you have to be able to measure them. So what happens is that all of a sudden, when you take that to the highest form of knowledge, what you just did is that anything that cannot be quantified has to be destroyed or ignored. And everything knowledge now is the science, or is the art of measuring things, and everything comes to measurement. So, and think about what is the ultimate unit of measurement in a merchant society is money. Because all of a sudden you created a standard, a unit or a standard to measure everything against, and it is money. So everything, all of a sudden, you have, say, a rainforest, and because there are all these aspects that are qualitative aspects of the rainforest that you cannot measure, right? Like biodiversity, or I don't know, all this beauty, all these things. All of a sudden, a forest is how many tons of timber you have to explore or to exploit. So what you're doing, right, is you're reducing everything to a number, and the ultimate unit of measurement of everything in a mercantilistic society is money. And look at our world. What is the blood of our society today? It's money, because it's the ultimate way.
You just said something, and it made me think of something I was talking about yesterday. But like national parks national parks. I was trying to think. I was talking to Tim from Fakeologist, and I said, I like national parks because there's beauty there, and you get to go walk around the park and all that. But at the same time, I know that there was a reason for creating national parks, and it had to do with the Rockefellers and John Muir and the environmentalists, the fake environmental movement of the 1920s and that stuff. And it really was to cordon off land so people wouldn't be able to get into it. But you just said something that made total sense. Is there is a commercialization of beauty in nature. Like, come see the Grand Canyon, and you're going to pay $30 to be able to go see the Grand Canyon, or you're going to have to pay money to go into this national park and see the beauty of the national park. So even the beauty of nature has been quantified and commercialized, that's where we live in now. Where you want to see beauty, you're going to see it in Sunset Magazine.
Well, when you take a reason to be the highest value in society, then everything becomes a number. So think about health. What is health? Then you go to a doctor, and the first thing that they do is they measure your blood pressure and your cholesterol and how many times per second your heart is pumping, right? And all this. And then you go, for example, education. The way you measure how good the education is you have these tests where you give grades to kids, and then everything becomes a number. And same with everything. And if you think the perfect rational system of government is when you govern by numbers, which is basically democracy. Because democracy is who has most of the votes, but all of a sudden what you did is you reduce governance to who has the majority of votes, right, or number. So what you have done is you have created a numeric system of government, and you can do that with everything, right? Like art now, painting is how much is worth, right? And everything becomes a number. Like people now, you reckoning, right, and reasoning. Then all of a sudden, what you have is in a society where you're running everything by numbers. Then the society runs by statistics, which is the science of the state to measure things, right? And then you become a number, right? You have your social security number, and then everything are just aggregates and numbers to be qualified, and everything becomes a statistic and an average. But that's just an idealization of things. But the real things that you cannot quantify, like love, happiness, life, the soul, the spirit, all these things, then they disappear. They're not accountable. You cannot account for them. They are irrational, meaning they cannot be reasoned about, and because they cannot be measured. And then basically they are either ignored, or they have to disappear, or they have to be destroyed because they are antagonic to the goddess, which is reason.
Hey man, I know what you're talking about. I saw in a magazine ad that love is a diamond ring.
Yeah, exactly. So. Everything gets reduced to a number, like what you're doing. And think about the latest, right, is like, but there is another side of this, right? And is, think about who was Prometheus. Prometheus is the myth of this guy who stole the fire from the gods and brought it to humanity and gave it to humanity. Now, what he did is he took fire and stole it and gave it to humans. Now, in the Christian tradition, right, there is one guy who did the same, and it's Lucifer, which is the light bearer. So, and think about what this time of the French Revolution is how the enlightenment is to getting light. And if you think what it is, right, is Lucifer is the guy who got the light, right, and who got think about the tradition of the Genesis, right, where you have the snake who took the apple from the tree of knowledge and gave it to humans and promised that they would become like gods once they ate from the tree of good and evil. What you're doing is, with this knowledge, with reason, when you raise it to the highest point in values and in the sky, and when it becomes a god, then humans who control reason and who use reason become like gods. And think about what I was saying, the thought experiment of thinking you 1,000 years ago to today. Look at the world where we live today. We have electricity, we have telepathy, where you're on the other side of the world right now, I'm on the other side, we're talking here, we can fly, we can go to the moon, all this technology, those are the tools of the gods, and they're brought to us by reason. So that's the other side. So it has this side that is an incredibly powerful tool that has brought to us technology, which is basically the fire of the gods, and has made us like gods, but then it has a dark side, which is when you take that and reduce everything to reckoning and counting and numbers and measurement, then what starts happening is that the things that you cannot measure, which are the very basic things that makes us humans, start to disappear. So we start killing the planet, right? We start taking out we start killing life. Because what we're doing, right, is we're destroying the forests, the oceans, all these things, by this urge to grow and grow and grow and account for everything. But because the things that we cannot account for are not measurable, then and are irrational by definition, then they don't exist in this system, which is a closed system where the only thing that exists is what has extension and can be measured.
Well, yeah, we're seeing this more of a progression towards this, we were talking about here, like the quantification of, like for instance, with your labor, your output, the energy expenditure, and now they have the technology now, and we're seeing this come out in the form of these consumer products. Like we're talking about this with Jay Dyer before about the. It's called the let me have it right here. The switch gable machine. Have you heard of that?
Never heard of that. What is that?
Let me read this paragraph real quick from this. This is like from This is a book from. It's called Anthropo. I don't even know how to say that. Anthropotelemetry. Dr. Switch Gable's machine. It says an electronic device capable of tracking the wearer's location, transmitting information about his activities, communicating with him, and perhaps modifying his behavior is now in experimental use in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This method of surveillance differs from eavesdropping in that the wearer is aware of it and may have consented, at least nominally, to its use. Since the wearer carries the device with him, it can be used to keep him under continuous surveillance. Partly because of these factors, tracking is likely to have a stronger effect on behavior than eavesdropping. So they were experimenting with this, and this is from 1966. And you're talking about if you want to get a more of a clear quantification of somebody's output or their work. This would be a perfect way to do it, but we're seeing people already, buy into this stuff, and one of the main selling points for this iWatch that Apple came out with was they really put a heavy emphasis on, well, this will help you to keep fit. This will help you, with your exercise regimens and all of that, and it has all these different sensors and stuff that track your heart rate and how much calories that it can estimate how many calories that you're expending and all of that. And
by the way, real quick, Chris, I just want to comment on that point and then let you go back. Millennium by Jacques Attali, he talks about watches that are going to do that, and he wrote that book in 1990.
Oh wow, cool. Yeah. So we're seeing it being implemented now. Like people are, if you look at Japan and how they organize their work days and all that, they have like mandatory. They say it's not mandatory, but it's like there's a lot of social pressure for everybody to participate, and then they go out and they exercise and they do it on a routine basis by the clock, and that's what this switch cabled machine is designed to facilitate that. So you see, like, as this becomes incorporated more and more into the culture and society, how this can really have a more accurate assessment of, like, well, did you goof off today, or did you put out enough work units? Did you burn enough calories while performing this function? And all these different quantifiers to see your value in the workforce as things start to progressively get more tightened up, as a lot of jobs are being replaced now by robots and that sort of thing.
Yeah, correct. And the other thing that you see, right, is that the perfect tool for control is this system. So this system allows you, when you can measure things, then what you can do, one of the things that you can do when you measure things is you can predict. So what you're doing with this is you're creating predictable beings if they comply with your measurements, right, and with the rules that you put in society. But life is about spontaneity, and this is something that is it goes against order. Like, if you think about order, right, is predictable. So a society of control by number is a society where things are predictable, where you have mass consumption, right, and all cars look the same, and all people go to the same schools, and they adhere to the same standards, and everybody thinks the same. So what you're doing with this, and it's the perfect place to control something, but if you think about it, what you're doing is you're killing innovation in a way, right? Like what we're doing. So yeah, in the last 200 years, we have innovated because we stopped believing in fairy tales of people with beards in the sky and so on. But now, what we live is in this system, which is highly controllable, and any kind of spontaneity or any change or deviation from the norm is censored by the system where we live today. Which is the whole point of nature, right? Is that there is spontaneity and there is imagination and things that you cannot control or quantify, and those are things that are irrational. And what you can see is that you have a lot of movements in society that try to go that way, and then you have this in art, right? So towards the 19th century and the 20th century, what you start having is all these surrealists and all these movements that are trying to escape from the tentacles of this system of reason, but ultimately they end up being just failed artistic expressions, or they go on the sideways, right? Same thing in the 60s, right? You have all these spontaneous and in a way, right, where all these the psychedelic movements and all these things, and at the end they succumb to the number, and we live in a world today where everything is run and ruled by numbers.
Yes, that is true, and I don't think a lot of people think about this type of stuff. It's unfortunate because they work with it. If they go to work, that's what they're dealing with all day long. Is the rationalization of like Chris was talking about. Where now they're, the boss starts counting how many minutes you're in the bathroom for, or something like that. So,
yeah. Because we got to. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying real quick. We got to compete with the robots.
Right, the robot doesn't have to use the bathroom. So.
Yeah, we've been told how great, free trade, and then we got to compete with the Chinese or the Central Americans and all that, and then the next competition round will be humans against the robots.
Right. Oh, yes, that's a great point. Well, when you get down I mean, this system that we live in, the worldwide system that is capitalist, communist, whatever it is you want to call it, the money system, it's like you said, it was born out of this idea of things being reasonable. But you see, Jose, the average human being's idea of what is reasonable is not necessarily what the people who call themselves reasonable is. So if you were to say, if the priesthood were to come down off the mountain and start saying, listen, your output in the daily, in the daily work situation is not what it should be, we're going to have to start chopping off heads. One of the first things out of someone's mouth might be, hey man, be reasonable. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Because it doesn't seem reasonable to someone that I'm going to, because I'm not a good producer-consumer, like the United Nations refers to you as, because I'm not a good producer-consumer, therefore I need to be done away with. Here's an interesting quote. I wanted to read this. This is from page 33 of The Organization Man by William H. White, which I've read from a couple of times now. But this was a speech given by a scientismist at the United Nations. I thought this was pretty interesting. In spelling this out, social engineers characteristically shield themselves from the implication of their doctrine by describing how social engineering could be applied to a worthy cause. In the typical example, psychiatrist William Borberg with a B, explains how social engineering would be applied to the United Nations. Now, the knowledge accumulated in the social sciences and the understanding of its possible value to the United Nations must of necessity be greater among the scientists themselves than among policy-making leaders and diplomats. I therefore wonder whether the social scientists might not consider the desirability of creating themselves an organ for the purpose of that relationship. This would be one of the means by which we may gradually introduce into the thinking of policy-making leaders more and more scientific knowledge, scientific methods, and scientific mentality, and thus gradually substitute the present, essentially emotional basis for peace by a much better and much more reliable one, the scientific view of peace.
It's exactly that, right? Like, what they're trying to do is reduce human interactions to statistics, which is exactly that, right? Is the only and is the beauty and the advantage of the scientific method, but at the same time, its weakness is that all it can do is to measure things. So the approach to anything is trying to measure in an objective, in quotes, way, things, and tries to imply rules or ratios out of this, right? Reasoning. However, the problem is that you're trying to constrain, or basically you create a model of the world which is based on number. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to comply everything and to fit everything into the model that you created. But humans, we have a big chunk of us, right? And I would say the majority of us is not rational. So our subconscious and our emotions and our feelings and 99% of what drives our lives is not rational. So when you have these crude systems, like when you think about communism, right, the first thing that I think is called is these gray buildings, mass production, housing complexes, right, that all the buildings are the same. And at the end, they're not created for humans, but for robots, what you say. Because what they're doing is the citizen becomes only a number, right, and a statistic in their system. So I think that's the interesting thing about this paradigm is that it's incredibly powerful, but at the same time, the seed of its own destruction is inside it because it has this blind spot That is that anything that it cannot be measured it has to ignore. But the reality is that if you think about what is what you are really, right? What is what your experience tells you that you are, is the first thing and the most undeniable thing that you have, that is awareness, cannot be measured. But in the rationalistic, materialistic, reductionist system that we live in, consciousness is an illusion. It doesn't exist. But consciousness, self-awareness, is the thing that we know with certainty that we have, and it cannot be accounted by the system that we have to describe the universe. So it's a system that has a fatal flaw right at the center of it. That is, it denies humanity at the center of it, because we're not numbers.
The basis for social science and sociology is, I think Comte talked about this, where he said that it was a system that was aware of itself. It was a self-aware system that was aware of all of the things going on within inside of it. And he said that at the time when they were introducing the idea of social sciences, it was that, there was a system before that was not self-aware. So the system is allowed to be self-aware, but the human themselves is not self-aware.
Yeah, which is a contradiction in terms, right? Like the thing that we have that we know with certainty is awareness, and you can deny what is the nature of our awareness, right? So you can, you look around, and just like in the Matrix, you could say, no, what happens is that we're connected to computers and we're being fed dreams, and then reality is not real. Or you could say, no, reality is real. You can have all these debates about what you're aware of. But one thing that is undeniable is awareness. We cannot deny awareness, because it's foundational to our experience, right? We're absent awareness, there is no experience, and then nothing exists. So, but the funny thing is that that particular thing that is awareness is not material, and is not you cannot reduce it to a number. It's not quantifiable. It is something that is out of the realm of this system, and I think that's the fatal flaw of the system. So by trying to reduce everything, and the ultimate way to reduce everything is when you try to digitize everything. So if you think about it, the extreme of this system of quantification of everything is this digital world where people are trying to have digital lives, and now they have digital relationships, and they have the selfies and the digital images and all these digital personalities and all this, which is basically what you're doing is you're reducing to a language of ones and zeros everything, but you're leaving out the main and most important thing, that is life itself. So that's the extreme. That's the end result of this, is this digital world where everything is codified and quantified into ones and zeros.
Well, yeah, we were talking about like the definition of reason. Well, what is reasonable? Now, who determines that? I mean, that's written into the language of the Constitution, right? With the Fourth Amendment. Like I have it here, it says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by an oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things, and then blah blah blah. Unreasonable is that term, or that word. Who gets to define that? Well, so we look at our Supreme Court case law and in the determination of are checkpoints 100 miles within the boundaries of the United States where you have to stop and be interrogated, are those reasonable? Well, the Supreme Court says yes, that's reasonable. And then now they have John, they have those out in California where you cross into California, you go out of California, you have to stop at these checkpoints looking for produce. fruit.
Yeah,
right.
you got to make sure that you're not bringing any fruit back from Mexico.
Right, you're not bringing fruit back from Mexico. So never mind that they don't check it there. They only ask your citizen, but whatever, it's like that. But even though it makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever, the Supreme Court has deemed that reasonable. So, we're like trying to get a definition of what that is. It's really up to the people in quote-unquote authority, right? So what we're talking about here, and like what Jose's bringing up too, it's like, well, quantifying everything and ignoring the realities of our consciousness, our spirit, the soul, the spirit, the creator. Ignoring those things and set them aside, and what you're left with is man himself as supreme ruler. So man himself makes those definitions and defines those terms.
Absolutely. If you think about it, there is, and I think the definition that we gave for reason, right, which is basically quantity and the number, it can be extended. I think it's too strict, and it can be relaxed a little bit. And I think it goes beyond that. And when you mentioned the Constitution, I think it came to me that when you're talking about the Constitution, for example, what you're doing is you're doing the enactment of the creation of a state based on a Constitution. What you're doing, right, is you're codifying the laws of the state. So it's the behavior of the people in the state, and the rules that are going to regulate the behavior of the state itself have to be codified. So part of reason, right, is the idea that what you are doing, and is this obsession that we have in the West on codifying everything. So what you want to do is you want to create language to describe everything, and being able to take anything and catalog it and put it into boxes. And this, by the way, in the French Revolution, you can see there was this obsession, and the first encyclopedia was created by Denis Diderot. And is this encyclopedic knowledge where what they were trying to do was to codify the universe and put it into books, into these large, grandiose books of knowledge, which were basically supplanting the Bible, because the Bible was the official and the Word of God, right? And now what you have is you have these secular books of everything called encyclopedias, and then what you start having is these legislative bodies that are creating language and rules and regulations, and to account and regulate everything that happens in society. And I think this is a Judeo-Christian obsession, that is the idea of codifying everything. And you can see in the Gospel of John, right, is at the beginning it was the Word, and the Word was God, and God was the Word, right? Is this idea that language is, and the idea that you can codify and you can create everything and put it in boxes. And what you're doing is you're creating this system of sounds and symbols, where what you're doing is you're reducing reality to this system of reasoning, which is basically this linguistic construct that we build, and we create this hyper reality based in language. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately it becomes the digital world that we have created, right? And what you're doing is you're taking reality and you're abstracting it, and you're putting it in this level of language, and now you're operating on that level, and you're mistaking that level for reality itself.
Right.
So all of a sudden, what you're doing is that the words that you are using to describe things become what you're describing, and become what you're talking about. So you're supplanting the real objects by the symbols that you're using, to the nomenclature that you have to talk about the world.
Yeah, Gestalt philosophy, or reification, where you make something real, you bring it into being, you make it concrete by creating it out of your perceptions.
Right.
That's why it's bringing up the Constitution and law, because what is like the definition of the word to codify is to systematize, to organize, to arrange, to order, to structure, to codify. And if you look at law, because you were talking about how this philosophy has a flawed premise, which, like if you get into a debate with somebody who's a naturalistic materialist, for instance, and then ask them, okay, how do you arrive at your conclusions? Well, I arrive at my conclusions through my my reasoning faculties. I say, okay, your reasoning faculties are a product of chaos and disorder, and so how do you get a reasoning being out of chaos and disorder and random mutation and fluctuations in, chemical processes and all that? So you have to assume the very thing that you're trying to draw your conclusion, and so you have this infinite regression, or this just a continual begging of the question of, well, how do you know that your consciousness is capable of bringing you to reason unless you assume the very thing that you're basing all of your premises off of? You have to assume that thing. You can't examine that premise. You can't falsify it. You have to use that as springboard to draw all your further conclusions off of, and that very thing doesn't have any foundation other than your say so.
Exactly. Hence, so it becomes the God.
Right. So you become a God, and everything that emanates from that philosophy is ultimately arbitrary.
Yeah, and if you think about it, is antagonic to life itself, because life cannot be quantified. So the spirit, right, the essence, basically numbers or reality has two sides. One is quality, and the other one is quantity. So quality, right, the qualia, what can be sensed, what can be experienced, and the awareness itself of that experience, that cannot be quantified. And so what you're doing is you're getting this world of words, of this dead world of symbols, and you're pretending that you live your life on that system, but in reality what you're doing is you're renouncing life itself.
Right. Yeah. It's well, I mean, if you listen to these modern purveyors of Scientism, the regulars that are out there on the talk show circuits, and they have their own television shows, and they have their own speaking engagements, the Neil deGrasse Tyson and the Richard Dawkins and the Sam Harris and the Lawrence Krauss and those people. You listen to their discourse and pay attention to how they, on a regular basis, deregulate humankind to some insignificant speck of, like you're saying, a speck of dust floating in space. We are no more than a conglomeration of chemicals and a chance happenstance of random mutation and wild dumb luck, and we're spinning in space. And now we've got to the point in recent years where that is not enough to deregulate mankind. We are only one universe and one planet in one universe among 10 to the 500th power other universes in the multiverse. So not only are we insignificant on our universal level, we're infinitesimally insignificant on a vast multiversal level.
Oh, no, absolutely, and you see one of the and one thing that I don't want to leave here is that I'm not anti-rationalist, right? I think reason is a tool, like a hammer is a tool, but the thing is that you don't take a hammer and you don't punch everything with a hammer.
Right.
Reason has its place, and it's been an incredibly liberating tool, and it has bring us all these wonders of the modern world. But it has its perils too, and it's we have to see it just for what it is. It's only a tool. So I think that's one thing that is important, right? And it's not that I'm an anti-rationalist. I deal and it's an incredibly important and powerful tool, but it's only that. And I lost my train of thought. That was a sideway that I was doing, and then what were you saying before? Sorry, man.
Oh, well, I was just talking about how the priest class, or the spokesholes for Scientism, it is a misanthropic belief system. It like deregulates humankind and denigrates humankind to where we're encouraged to see ourselves as just an insignificant accident that has no purpose or design whatsoever, and we're just a product of just random dumb luck and chance.
Oh,
and that's all there is to it,
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, one of the things when you take this up to the extreme, right, is that supposedly science is the system that we have to get the ultimate answers to the questions of why are we here and what is the universe and so on.
Yeah.
But at the end, all you can do with science is measure things.
Right.
And if you see, for example, we're trying to describe the ultimate nature of reality, and then in antiquity we have these systems of the atomic system, right, and the atoms and all these things. Now today what we have is this system called, for example, to describe particles, which is quantum physics. And what you see is incredibly powerful, and the fact that we're talking to a computer now is part of this system, but it's a quantitative system only. So what you have is you have all these wave functions, right, and this collapse of this probabilistic method of where particles are, right, and then they have come with all these abstractions of then particles have flavors and colors and all. They have created all these different attributes of the particles. But they're just linguistic. They're only quantitative. So what you have is a probabilistic system of the atom, but it doesn't have any answer to, like, any epistemological foundation. It's only quantitative. So what you're doing is you're giving a numerical description of reality and where particles may be, or what is the speed of the particles. But you're never answering the questions of what is the ultimate reality of the universe, because with this system, all you can do is you can measure things, and that's it. That's all you can do. Now, the other thing that, like, this idea that you're a speck of dust lost anywhere, think about what is your, like, I'm an empiricist. I believe in that, like, the ultimate reality to me is what my senses give me. And if I see where I am in this system, right, and what my senses tell me is I'm at the right dead center of the universe. And I think it happens to you and everyone else in this universe, any sentient being, we are the center of the universe. And the universe, we are at the dead center of the universe, and then it expands around us, and it evolves and revolves around us. But we are incredibly important in our own reality, and that's what this system tries to do. Is you're only a number, you're only like one more vote, you're a social security number, right? You have to comply to the system. But our direct experience, and they made us forget that, guess what? I am the center of the universe, because that's how I experience the universe.
Right.
And that's how everyone else experiences the universe. And think how empowering that is. The idea that we're so important that we're at the dead center of this reality, and we are the actors, right, of this reality. We're the main character of our own story. But from the point of view of the myth that they try to sell us, we're just a number.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people now are really interested in the, cosmology and the whole flat Earth debate and all that stuff. And, like what we're talking about here, I think it is important in the regard of, where it puts us in the universe. And then, if you think about it, and then, you get to looking into this stuff, which I've looked into it a lot more than I ever have in my life, because, it's just, you get exposed to some of this stuff, and it's like, wow, yeah, that's right. And then it just kind of makes you want to dig more. But, okay, what this idea that was started with Copernicus, right? We're going around the sun, and we're just this one planet in this galaxy that's part of multiple galaxies, and we're kind of just going through space, and we're far from the center. We're just kind of out here in the periphery, and then, ask yourself, what does that do for the average person on a practical level? Because when you start looking into this stuff, you say, okay, the Earth is spinning, and this, these massive centrifugal forces and all that stuff is like, how does that apply to like air travel? And it says, well, no, it doesn't. That we don't factor any of that into our equations. How does it factor into land surveying? The curvature of the Earth and all that. It says, no, we don't. We don't factor anything, and then we treat the Earth as a flat plane. So it really, what's a really interesting thing about the curved Earth, or the ball Earth concept, you see how little practical application it has to anything tangible and real in the common human experience. So it can only best be viewed as some abstract conceptual idea that has philosophical and more of a philosophical or a religious contextual meaning other than a practical applicable thing. Because if you go try to find it, it's like, okay, where do you account for the curvature of the Earth? Like when you're taking a photograph of something that's like 60 miles away, it's like, why doesn't it disappear behind the curvature? And then there's all kinds of quasi-scientific explanations of why, it's a mirage or something like that. But, okay, so there's another example of where this curved Earth has no practical bearing on our experiential reality at all. It's only this abstract concept that exists within our mind that only serves to put us in a deregulated state of in our perceptions, right?
Correct. But if you think about it, right, like the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun and not that the sun revolves around the Earth is arbitrary. It's just a frame of reference that you're taking. So it becomes an ideological system. Right. And again, it's just like reason that is only a tool. If what I'm trying to do is model the orbits of the planets, then it is more convenient to take the sun as the center and resolve all your system of equations thinking that the sun is in the center. But it doesn't mean that the sun is in the center. It is only a frame of reference that you're taking in order to solve a system of equations that you're having. So you hear it as a statement of fact that the Earth revolves around the sun, but that's not the case. That's figurative. That's language. Mm-hmm. What you have is you have one spinning around the other, and depending where you're standing, you're going to see, if you're standing on the sun, what you're going to see is that the Earth revolves around the sun. But if you're standing on the Earth, what you're going to see is that the sun revolves around the Earth.
Right.
It is relative to the system of reference that you take. And what you were saying is completely true. Like, for example, if we're talking about the theory of relativity, right, and that time contracts as the speed increases and that mass increases, practically, when you're talking about the speeds that we live at, right, or the curvature of the Earth, what you were saying, you can neglect them because they're not in the day-to-day experience. However, if what you're doing is you're putting a satellite on the atmosphere, right, and to rotate around the Earth, now you have to take into account the curvature of the Earth, right, and all these things, or otherwise you couldn't put the satellite. These things, and this is the thing, what I was trying to convey before, is that people mistake reality with the language that we have to describe reality. So what we do is we create stories in language to describe our experiences, but then we confer reality to the stories that we created to talk about our experiences, and we forget that they were only models, linguistic models and symbolic models that we created to describe what we are aware of. And we mistake them. So we give reality to this idea that the sun revolves around the Earth, but it's only a frame of reference. It's only a linguistic shortcut that we take in order to describe an experience that we have.
Yeah, well, you have to deny what you're... Oh, yeah, this is like, what is the saying? You're going to believe me or you're going to believe your lying eyes, you know? you see, if you fly in a plane or if you looking off on top of a mountain or anything, you don't see any kind of curvature of the Earth. You don't see any kind of indicator that you're flying through space at thousands of miles per hour. You can see rotations in the stars, but are they going around the Earth, or are we going around them, or what's happening there? You know, we have to go off of what we're told and what the priest class tell us, and that's always been the case as long as civilization has been around. People delegate those concepts to the priest class, and now it's framed within these ideas of science, and science, and science has figured this all out, and we have the calculations to prove it. But from what I understand, if you could take the same models and they fit as easily into a geocentric model as they do a heliocentric model. They work either way. It's like you were saying, it's just a matter of perspective. What point of reference do you want to work off of? And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, what happens, right, is that it is more economical, right? When you create a system of equations to describe the movement of the planets around the Earth, right, or what we perceive, if you take the Earth as the center of the system, what happens is that the system of equations to describe the rotation of the planets is more complicated from that point of view. So it is more succinct to assume that the sun is at the center of the system, because then that simplifies your equations, and then what you can see is you have these elliptical orbits of the planets around the sun. So it's a very succinct way to represent the model of the sun and the planets in revolving around each other. But it's only a frame of reference. So it's more economical, but it doesn't mean that that's what happens, because factually, another way that you could see things is that when you're walking around the world, right, and that's like your perspective from your point of view, every time you do a step or you take a step, what you're doing is you're pushing Earth underneath your feet. So you're rotating the Earth, or you're moving the Earth with respect to your body every time you walk around, or every time you get into a car. What you're doing is you're accelerating the Earth underneath you. So you could create a model, right, where you could have equations to describe everything, where you're always at the dead center of everything, which is your experience. And from the experiential point of view, that's what makes sense. However, it would be incredibly complicated to put all these equations. So it's easier to think, no, you know what, the Earth is static, and then we're moving on top of the Earth, and then the sun is static, and then the Earth is revolving around the sun, and so on. But it's just a frame of reference to describe our experience. But our experience is that we're at the center, and everything revolves around us.
Yeah, so you have to defer to authority to tell you what reality is, instead of going off of your own 5 sense experiential reality that you can confirm through your own senses. And well, I mean, there's probably a lot of examples like that out there. I mean, there's kind of concepts in science that don't lend themselves to any kind of direct observation, but then we're told that this is how things operate, and like germ theory of disease or something like that, and those things are widely accepted, which I don't necessarily deny those things. I think I deny them in the idea that they're given way too much weight as far as like their explanatory power for the causes of disease, and I think they leave out a big part of the picture, which is diet and stuff like that. But
Oh, absolutely. And the other flaw that we have in our stories about that the stories that we tell to describe our experience is that we always project ourselves on these stories, right? And and we project our ideologies on these stories. So, for example, when you talk about disease, right? If you think about it, we come from a long lineage of our history is the history of these warlords and these medieval lords that we've been engulfed in wars since the inception of reality. So what happens in our society is that when you see diseases, what you see is that humans are in a state of war against these organisms, and then what we have to do is we declare war, and then medicine is our weapon to kill diseases. But if you see, it's ideological. The whole thing that we're doing is we're projecting our gladiator mentality into the world, and now what we're saying is, germs are enemies that we have to combat. So what we did is we took the language that we have to describe wars, and we are applying that now as a metaphor to what we call diseases, but it's only we're using one language to describe another thing. It doesn't mean that there are germs and that there are war, and it's only a way to describe things. But my point is that we end up mistaking the descriptions that we have of reality with reality itself, because what we're doing is we're projecting.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot with, just there's so much that people in general take for granted as far as, just say, for example, like nations and nationalism, and we talk about, like, this is America, and it's like, so when somebody says America, I mean, there's all kinds of baggage attached to that word, but when you try to break it down to its actual meaning, it's like, well, okay, first of all, are you talking about Central America? Are you talking about North America? Are you talking about, does that include Canada? Does that include Mexico? America is, America, the continent America. What are you talking about? When people are talking about generally speaking, if you're here in the United States, they're talking about the United States. And when I was in the Navy, I went to South America, Argentina, and Chile, and they would correct you on that. They would say, well, you'd say, I'm an American. They said, well, I'm American too. And say, oh, yeah, you're right. You're South American, and I'm Norte Americano, like we're saying, it's about perspective and where you're at. It's like, well, America to Americans is the center of the universe. But, it's just...
And what is America? Like, if you think about it, like, what is the United States, right? It's an imaginary thing drawn on top of a map or whatever, right? But it's only a concept. But we mistake that concept with the reality.
Yeah, and then we don't even define our terms to even, like, you could catch people off guard if you say, oh, yeah, what do you mean by that? Can you explain that? I mean, can you break it down? Can you, quantify that? Like, what do you mean by, America? And it's like, it's just because it is, these associations that have been built up with this word, and they're sort of abstractions, or they're sort of this visualizations of what that is that don't lend themselves to any kind of real clear definable explanation, then you probably end up with, like, a lot of people that are just frustrated with, like, oh, what do you mean America? Of course America, like, apple pie, Chevrolet, grandma's house or whatever. It's like, well, you're not even describing anything that has anything to do with a nation state or whatever. How do you define nation state? How do you define these things? Well, they're abstractions. They don't exist in reality. So you have to conceptualize these things, and then when it comes down to trying to actually explain them or quantify them or anything like that, they don't lend themselves to that. But they're as real as anything they're as real as anything to certain people who are given over to this reification, or whatever you want to call it, where it's these things have taken on this life. It's kind of like the old the golem legend of the Hebrews, where they could breathe life into a statue or something like that, and it becomes real.
Absolutely. That's the other thing I wanted, and this is a perfect segue to the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and is demons. and you use the golem, right? There is a name in magic for that called the Egregores. And an egregore is a collective being. So basically the idea is that when a lot of people believe in something, that thing acquires a reality. And it makes sense, right? Like if a lot of people believe in the United States, all of the sudden people change their behavior because now they believe on that. And the manifestation of that entity, say the United States, is the behavior of people. So people join the army and go and kill other people because they believe that the United States kicks ass or whatever it is that they believe. But the behavior was that they kill other people based on this belief. So the belief becomes real because it manifests in reality as the behavior of people. And we're talking about the same thing, right? It's the confusion of language and concepts with reality. And we live in that world of psychic ideas, right, and energies, and these concepts. And then we act in reality with our bodies based on our beliefs.
Yeah, it's well, when you break it down to how it operates, it's basically reactionary. It's reflective. It's reflexive. I mean, it's not. It doesn't operate through reason. You know that word again, reason and logic. They operate through action and reaction, emotional responses to stimuluses, you know, and you have sloganeering, and you have these emotionally charged words that politicians and stuff will continually, fallaciously rely upon to get traction in their particular sphere of influence, where they're just making these references to these emotionally charged words and phrases. And they have to do it in such a way where they're maintaining their presentation and their delivery, and that's really the things that are important to, like, say, a political race or something like that. It's totally abstract, and it doesn't lend itself to any kind of real analysis of, okay, well, what is this person's qualifications? How can you let's look at those and define those and see what his capabilities are, or her capabilities are, as far as they're be able to perform this particular specific function, which would be, you know, President of the United States or whatever. That's never even hinted at. It's like, well, how do they sound when they talk, or how do they present themselves, or they said this to this person and it hurt their feelings, and let's talk about that and how people's feelings get hurt and stuff. It's just totally off the wall as far as, like, trying to get anything definitive out of all of this stuff that people that emanates or comes out of these unexamined premises, which are based upon these abstract concepts that have no real basis in reality.
Right, and they're, what you said, loaded with emotions. So
right,
you condition.
That's the important thing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, which is the previous discussion, the last discussion we had about magic, right, and how you create all these symbols and all these different. You basically, what you're doing is you're charging objects like talismans with energy, with emotional energy, and then you can trigger responses like you predefine based on that, right? Because you're conditioning people to worship the flag or the anthem or whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, or you do the same thing with words.
Oh, absolutely. So you create these myths, right, and these stories, and then, but this is the most powerful spell that the priests do, right, and the priestly class has done, is the creation of the nation state. And I think this rounds up the conversation that we were having, right, about democracy and how the state was supplanted, or basically we used to have this religious power that basically became secular and just replaced the old paradigm with these nation states that supplanted God. So I think, and that's the creation of the Leviathan, right? And it's the creation of this demon and basically a demon is a supernatural entity that is a psychical entity that basically becomes has a manifestation in reality. And in order to do that, what it needs is a body. So what you want to do when you're creating or bringing into existence or manifesting or emanating a demon is you want to give it a body. That's what is called an incorporation.
Yeah.
Corporation comes from corpus, which means body. And a corporation is basically giving a body to one of these entities, of these ethereal, psychical entities that only exist in your imagination, but when you summon them into reality, what you're doing is you're giving them a body. So you can imagine, for example, the creation of the United States of America or any other corporation for that matter. But let's see what happens with the creation of the corporation called the United States of America. What you're doing is you are creating a constitution, right? Where what you're doing is you're creating the rules and you're creating this ritual where you're defining this is the presence that I want to build, and then the next thing is to give it a body. And think about what the body of the state is, right? So you go to Washington, D.C., and what you have is a body is constituted by organs, and then you can see is all the organisms of the state. So you have all the different departments, the Department of Health and the Department of Economy and all these different departments that you have. Those are the different organs of the state. And what you're doing is people believe in the existence of the state and they behave in the different systems that regulate the state and the different activities of the state. Say the circulatory system of these entities, demon that you created, is money. So the banking system is the blood of this entity, this monster that you created, and the aggregate of the flux of energy of this entity is money. So basically what you're doing, what we talked the last time, you're creating this talismanic system that is charged with the hopes and faith of people, and you're putting that into these pieces of paper, and that's how you modulate and move around and circulate the currency, which is basically the energy of people and the faith. And lastly, what you do, right, once you create all these organs, is that you can think about that you're giving it a skeleton when you start building buildings and monuments. So what you're doing is you're calcifying in reality these entities and these symbolic things. And so when you create a building, say, I don't know, the Capitol building, right. What you're doing when you create the Capitol is you're embodying the head of the state. And by the way, it's in the name, right? Like, so you have the Capitol, yeah. which comes from capital, caput, in Latin, which means head. And then yeah. think about all the symbology of, like, if you go to Washington, it's fascinating. I was there a couple of months ago with my daughters and my wife, and we were just walking around. And what you can see is basically Washington, D.C. is a Masonic enactment of the creation of a demon. So what you see when you go to a Washington Mall, you can imagine that what they did is they created this ritualistic body of the state, and they lay down in the architecture of the city of Washington, D.C. So what you have is, if you think about the Washington Mall, if you look at it from the top,
yeah,
what you have is the head, is the Capitol, and in there what you have is this bicameral entity, right, which is basically the brain of the system,
right?
And it has the two chambers, just like a real head of a human. So what you're doing is you're creating a golem. And then you go down, and you can see the body is the Washington Mall. And at the dead center of the mall, what you have is the obelisk. And the obelisk is the representation of the penis, is the generative symbol, the organ, the masculine organ, right, of reproduction.
Right.
And underneath it, what you have is the reflective pool, which, by the way, what it represents is the feminine organ. And then when you see from perspective, if you stand up at the Lincoln Memorial and you look at the Washington Monument reflected on the pool, what you're seeing is the sexual act. So it's a symbolic representation of the sexual act, because what you have is the the ovule is reflecting on the pool. The pool is the feminine organ, and the ovule is the masculine organ. And then you look, if you look at it as a body, and then you're looking from the top, what you see is that the right hand is the White House, which is the executive,
right?
Which is the right hand, which takes actions, right? And then you start seeing what they did is they created this ritualistic spell where what they're doing is they're giving a physical body to the state, which is this entity, this Leviathan that has armies and can kill people and put people in jail and enslave and do all these things. And there is a monument, right, and a skeleton of the body of the state, which is a demon, basically. It's the incarnation, the manifestation in reality of this psychic entity. And I find that to be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, that is. I've never heard it quite laid out that way. That's really good, man. It brings to recollection that, the Temple of Man in Egypt, it's the same kind of concept that you're talking about, where, where it had it's analogous to a human form with the different, the structures, and that, I remember seeing that pretty well explained in a documentary. I've done some reading on it too, but it's been a while, so I'm trying to remember all the. But I do understand that I think that this has its basis in the. I don't know if you want to say ancient cultures, because I don't know. We get told so many lies about history, and I was like, what would be even ancient? But that's another topic. But yeah, this demon or this unincorporated entity being given a interface for the subjects to interface with, so that they see something tangible, they see something concrete, they see something, real that exhibits itself in the real world, three-dimensional reality. And if you when you go to Washington D.C., one time when I was visiting there, I was just totally bowled over by the amount of idolatry, the statutes, the pagan references, the Greek references, and all that. And I said, well, this is definitely not representative of like a Christian, a capital of a Christian nation. This is something entirely different altogether.
It's completely secular. Like this, right. I don't know why people say that the United States is a Christian nation. It's never been. Yeah, it was created by these Masonic guys, right? Like these Masons, Freemasons, and it comes out of the Enlightenment, right? And it's exactly that. It's contemporary to the contemporaneous to the French Revolution, right? Where what they were trying to do is de-Christianize the state, and the United States is the first thing that you have is separation of state and church, right? So anyone can believe whatever it is, as long as they believe in the state. So
yeah, which is a religion itself.
I mean, it's the absolute religion, of course.
Yeah, when you bring up the demon with in the the golem, those concepts where you have this sort of it could be typically referred to as sort of a disembodied spirit that can, incorporate maybe a human body, or it can influence the human body, or that's the concept of that, and that's the old concept. There's an analogous concept in computing with the Daemon, which is a program that runs autonomously in the background of your operating system, so that it doesn't require any kind of you don't have to start it, you don't have to stop it. It's sort of it runs your computer's system, and it's totally unseen by you, and you're only engaging with the interface that you see directly in front of you with the buttons and the folders and the file system and all that. The daemon runs in the background, so it's the controlling unseen process that's always there. That's an integral part of the system, but it's not something that you ever get to interact with directly.
Right. Yeah, and you see in every legend of these demons, right, these Daemons, what you have is that, for example, the creation of the state at some point is created by these priests, but because it lives in the psyche of all the citizens and all the people that believe in the existence of that state, then at some point it acquires, it's a living creature, it's a living organism that basically has a life of its own. And is out of the control of one person in particular, and at the end it becomes larger than the collective that believes in it.
I think it's more analogous to an artificial intelligence. It is, I think, a lot of pretty profound analogies to a living system in a way that it is. It is at this point. Because you can have, because people may make reference to, oh well, this, that, or other thing is a government, conspiracy. This is a government conspiracy. You believe in government conspiracies, but no, I mean, you look at how the government operates on its face, not stuff that's. I'm not talking about backroom deals and smoky rooms and with the guys in pinstripe suits and they're making. No, I'm not even talking about any of that. I'm talking about the stuff that's right in your face. That is a conspiracy right directly in the open. It's open criminality. It's open, flagrant violations of morality that take place right directly in front of your face, but under the pretext and the context of, okay, they are identified as government, so that's okay for them to do these things.
Absolutely. Think about this travesty that is incredible, right? Like if you heard a story where, I don't know, the CEO of Apple decided to bomb the CEO or the Google headquarters because they didn't like the latest Android, right? And they decide to go and put a bomb in the headquarters of Google, everybody would say, you know what, this is uncivilized. Like, these people have to be in jail. It's like they're monsters. But that's at the corporate level. But if you think about at the state level, that's business as usual. No, this morning we had to bomb, I don't know, Palestine or Afghanistan or whatever it is, right? Yeah. It's business as usual. And these guys just walk around in their limousines and with their protection, and they're regarded as the highest nobility and all these things, where what they did is they just murder people. If anyone else does it, then they're monsters and psychopaths. But when it's done by a head of state, then it's just business as usual. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's asinine. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, I know. People accept it, though, because it's... even though they can go completely outside the boundaries of their own rules and their own laws and admit to it. Oh, yeah, we didn't run this act of war through Congress. We just declared it, and the executive branch did it.
It's genius, right? It's genius because if you think about it, last week there was like a plenary session in the UN here. So you had all the heads of states in the middle of New York. And what you had is they basically took over the whole city. They blocked half of the streets in New York City. And then these are supposed to be the public servants, but you have to pay for what they do, and they tell you what you have to do. But that's the genius of the system, is that no, but they're the servants. You are the boss now. That's what flipped at the French Revolution, right? That's the genius of the system. I think the idea that these guys were the descendants of God run all, and they, after 2,000 years of running, or 5,000 years of running with that story, it became old and people didn't believe it anymore. So they needed something new, and that's what they came up with. Now they are the servants and we are the masters. But never mind, we have to pay for everything and they tell us what we have to do.
Well, yeah, I think it comes back around to what we were initially discussing with words as talismans. You know, I think it took a bit to really, because it's such a, it's really, I mean, for myself, it's even, I still have a hard time grasping or understanding like how this stuff actually works and how the law actually works. I really have a pretty strong interest in it, but it's like, man, I understand it on a certain level, but it's so hard to articulate it. You know, what exactly that well, there I go. I'm at a loss for words. But anyway, taking words and thinking of them in concepts as what we're talking about with talismans or or symbols, or because a word, you speak it and it's a specific phonetic pronunciation, and it's kind of analogous to like maybe it can be boiled down to a symbol, which naturally we do with our alphabet and our consonants and our vowels and stuff like that. We graphically depict those things. And then, it becomes another level of abstraction. But with the law, it is that there's sort of distancing or abstraction process that's like compounded within this abstraction called the law, so that you get to the point where it's so confounding or confusing that people acquiesce to it, because it's all predicated upon this idea of authority, and that is all based on perceptions, right? So, if we perceive somebody to be in a position of authority, we reflexively defer to them based on conditioning that we've undergone through our childhood.
Absolutely.
And if you doubt that, dress up in a policeman's uniform and, make sure it looks real, and go strut around in the street and start barking orders at people and watch them jump. Watch them jump all day. They'll do it all day and night. Say, sir, you need to go stand over there. The guy will go stand over there. Why? Because you're a cop. You're a cop now.
Because you have the magic costume. Yeah, absolutely.
You have a magic costume, and it's like, well, somebody confronts me, hey, I know you're not really a cop. It's like, well, if you push the issue, I'm going to draw my pistol on you, and then we'll figure out exactly who the law is and who's not. That's the reality. That's the ultimate, what it comes down to. And it's like, well, okay, well, eventually, Chris, the real cops will show up and say, yeah, the real cops. Well, do you want to define them for me? It's like, how are they different from me? But but that just goes to demonstrate that it's the trappings or the talismans, the shiny 5-pointed badge.
And it comes to the trinity that we were talking at the beginning. So first they show the law and they show it as reason, and then if you don't comply to that part, then they come to the emotion, right? So then they do the appeal to emotion, and ultimately what they do is they go to the action or the body function, which is the army. So it's reason, then emotion, and then it's the gun at the end.
Right, and then it will ultimately always come down to the gun eventually, because that is where. Well, I mean, what did Mao Zedong say, that all political power emanates from the barrel of the gun, and that was absolutely 100% correct.
No, but that's when the spell collapses, right? Like,
right.
When the spell doesn't work anymore, then you have to show the gun. But hopefully, or what happens is that if everything was always down to the gun, then the system would collapse. But the reason why it works is because people believe in their own bullshit, and people believe in the authority of government.
Yeah, they believe in this abstraction called law, but when you really pick it apart and want to analyze it, it totally breaks down. It just totally comes unglued, totally comes apart. Then you get to see its complete arbitrary, capricious nature of it, and then you become disillusioned with this whole thing, and then it's not fun, but it is kind of entertaining on a level to dialogue with people that are represented as they identify themselves as government, to where you start calling them out on their bullshit, and then they will. I've had it happen to me so many times. They turn into like children. Like they resort to just the most inane, ridiculous babble. It's just really crazy. It's like, oh wow, so this is the true nature of it. Basically saying, you do what we tell you, we're going to kick your ass. And it's like, oh, why didn't you say that the first time? We could bypass all this shit.
If you push them a bit too hard, then they show their arm.
Yeah, it's like, okay, it's time to... And, it doesn't take very long to get them to at least hint at it. Like, we'll put you in jail if you don't do it. Or we're going
Right.
Yeah, but, it's arbitrary, it's capricious, and it is totally abstract and not... And it doesn't have any real basis in reality. And, I was trying to go somewhere with this, but I think I lost my train of thought on that. I was like, yeah.
No problem. You know what, guys? I gotta run. What time is it? Oh my God, it's been 2 hours. As usual, with you guys, time flies.
Yeah, it's just like, I know, I just looked at this, I can't believe it. It's like 2 hours gone by already, yeah. But, yeah, man, well, we could do it again, and whenever, you want to do it again, just... We'll be in touch, and we can set up another call, because I like exploring this cult of reason thing. I think it needs to be maybe fleshed out even more.
Yeah, and basically, and if you think about it, the god of enlightenment, just to close with this thought, is Lucifer. Is the light bearer. So we live in a Luciferian time where enlightenment is the ultimate. The reason is the tool of enlightenment, right?
Yeah, that's what they say, huh?
Yeah. So, guys, thank you so much for having me in.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you coming on, and we'll keep in touch, and do it again soon, hopefully.
Awesome.
All right, man.
Okay, thank you so much.
You have a good one.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
After all, these implements and text designed by intellects of X to find, evidently there's still so much that hides. And though the saints dub us divine in ancient fading lines, their sentiment is just as hard to pluck from the vine. I'll try hard not to pretend, allow myself no mock defense. To the night, since I don't have the time nor mind to figure out the nursery rhymes that helped us out and make a sense of our lives. The cruel, uneventful state of apathy releases me. I value them, but I won't cry every time one's wiped out. I'll try hard not to give in, batten down to further wind. No mock defense, step into the night. La da dum dum, 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 la da dum dum. But Lucy's eyes are blue when she places them in front of you. Nothing holds her own and can go to. Solemn one.